Now, slowly but steadily, this application is taking shape, but now as a next step, it would be nice to actually load the tasks of a user here. And for that, we could, of course, go to that user tasks component and not just load and set the username here, but also retrieve tasks for that user and then output the tasks here instead of this to-do text. We could do that, and depending on our application requirements, that might be exactly what we want to do. Here, however, I actually want to work with nested routes. And one reason, of course, is that I want to show you the concept of nested routes because it's an important one in Angular. But another reason is that we actually have two different routes that we can load for every user. Because we might want to show the tasks here, but we also might want to allow the user to add a new task. So we might want to show a form here that allows us to add a new task. And therefore, we should go back to the app routes.ts file and register two new routes, but the goal now actually is to register these routes as child routes for this user's user ID route. Because child routes are a special Angular routing feature that allows us to work with nested router outlets. And it will essentially allow us to load a component into another component that was loaded because of another route. And you'll see how it works in just a second. You set up child routes by adding the children property to the route to which you want to add it. So in my case, to this route. And then this takes another array of routes, where the route objects look exactly as they do in the main array of routes. So every route here has a path and a component and potentially some other configuration, which we will explore later. Though what's important to note about this path here is that it will automatically be concatenated to this path. So these child routes will automatically take the parent route path and append their own paths. So for example, here we could add tasks, and this would lead to this kind of route where we have our domain /users /some user ID /tasks, because it's configured as a child route to this route. Then here I might want to show the tasks component. Now, if I would save that like this, if you add /tasks here, after /users /some user ID, you will not get the desired result. The tasks component is not showing up anywhere on the screen. Because we're currently not telling Angular where to render this route here. You might say that we have a router outlet here in the app component, but that's for our main routes. Child routes, like this one here, need a separate router outlet in the component of which they are a child of. So we need to add a router outlet in that user tasks component so that the child components of this route here can be loaded there. So we need to go to the user tasks component HTML file, and there it's this placeholder paragraph that should be replaced with a router outlet. And for that to be available here, we need to go to the user tasks component TypeScript file, and there add this imports array and add the router outlet here, which of course also must be imported from Angular router. And with that, if you save this, if you visit /users /u2 /tasks, you will see this tasks component being output here. So that's a step in the right direction. As a next step, I also want to register a route for adding new tasks before we then, of course, want to make sure that we load the user-specific tasks and that we make sure that users can also add new tasks through that new task component. But let's start by adding another route for that new task. And here the goal is to have a path of tasks/new And then the component that should be loaded is the new task component. And that should be all. If you save that and you enter /users / some valid user ID /tasks /new, this form here shows up. And that shows you how nested routes work. Now let's make them a bit more useful. That's how nested routes work. Now, of course, I also want to make sure that we can reach them through links in our user interface so that we don't have to manually update the URL, because again, no one does that. So as a first step, we should go to the user component, because there we have the link to /users /some ID. Well, there this link should actually be updated now and also have tasks at the end here, so that we create a link that leads to /users /some ID /tasks. In addition, in that user tasks component, where I have this add task link, I also want to activate that link by using the router link directive here as well. And that should now navigate to /users, then the ID of the active user, /tasks /new. Now we could try to construct it like this, and for that we would need to get hold of the user ID somehow and construct this string dynamically, but conveniently, Angular also allows you to set up relative links. And that's what I'll do here. This is now a relative link relative to the currently activated route. So this user tasks component belongs to this route here. So any links you define in there are relative to this route. So they are appended to the currently active path, which would be users /some ID. That's why here we can simply construct this relative path, and as a result we'll get the full path to /users / the ID of the currently active user /tasks /new. With that, you of course also must make sure that in the user tasks component TypeScript file, you import router link and you add it to this imports array. With that, if you save that, you'll see that if you navigate between different users, tasks is appended here in the URL. And if you click on add task, this form here is loaded because we navigated to /users /some ID /tasks /new, just as intended. So now as a next step, it would be nice to actually load and display the tasks that belong to a specific user. And for that, we need to go to the tasks component because it's in there where I actually want to output my list of tasks. So here I need to fetch the tasks for a specific user because at the moment I just have this dummy fallback property here, which always holds an empty array. So how can we load the tasks for a specific user? Well, keep in mind that the user ID is dynamic and is part of the URL. And child routes also have access to this information that's encoded in the URL. Therefore, you can extract this data just as you could in the user tasks component. At least almost. I'll show you one limitation and a workaround in just a second. But in general, you can get hold of that user ID. And if we had access to that user ID, we could of course use the tasks service, and there this all tasks signal to then find the tasks that belong to a user with a certain ID. So therefore, back in the tasks component file, it would, for example, be nice if we could get the user ID as an input. So as a required input, which will be a string, just as we did it in the user tasks component, at least initially. Alternatively, we could also use this activated route approach. That would work here as well. But of course, using this input binding approach is a bit more convenient and shorter, and that's why I will use it here. However, at the moment, it wouldn't work. If you go to the tasks component template and you temporarily try to output that user ID here by reading that signal, if you would try to do that, you would see that nothing shows up here. It's not being output. Because by default, child routes do not receive those path parameters as input. They can get access to them with help of the param map through the activated route, for example. That would work. But this input binding does not work by default for child routes. So by default, a component can only get the path parameters that belong directly to its route through input binding. If, as a child route, you want to get the path parameters of a parent route, you explicitly have to tell Angular about your intentions by going to the place where you configured the router, and then there you need to pass an additional thing to provide router. You need to pass the with router config function to it, and you must execute that function here. And it is being imported from @AngularRouter. With router config takes an object as an argument, which allows you to configure this router in greater detail. Now, here are various things you could configure, and most of them are a bit more advanced. But what I do want to configure here is the params inheritance strategy. This setting should be set to always, and this will then ensure that those dynamic path parameter values are injected into child routes. So with this configuration set, in the tasks component, user ID will be set by Angular. And as a result, if you again try outputting it here in this template, you will now see that user ID here. And it does change as you change users. So that's how you can get access to that kind of data in a child component. And now we can use it to load the appropriate tasks.